Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today it's my distinct pleasure to have my good friend and colleague Michael Scher. Michael is we're both contributing editors for the FCPA blog, and he wrote a column this week that I thought was just fabulous, so I asked him if he would come on the show and visit with us not only about the column, but several of the posts he's written over the past couple of years, really around Walmart. Michael has not, he's not blasted Walmart, but he's used it as a teaching moment. And a teaching moment not only for potentially for Walmart, but much broader for the compliance community. So with that, Mike, thanks very much for coming on.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
And you've written several posts where, like I said, you've used Walmart really as a starting point for a discussion. Yes. And part of that discussion was about the role, responsibilities, and rights of a chief compliance officer or a compliance practitioner. So why don't maybe we start off with some of your thoughts on how Walmart could be a teachable moment for the rights of a compliance practitioner as opposed to their obligations.
Sure, for sure. You know, I've 3 decades ago when I started in this field, both in law and then in compliance, a lot has changed, as you know better than I, Tom. When I started in this, there were no compliance departments. The FCPA came out, and honestly, we didn't take it seriously as in-house counsels and then later as compliance officers. Our real focus was on anti-money laundering. So, you know, you sort of fast forward to where we are today. I think that history is important. Compliance officers now are a growing profession. They have their own professional associations, the SCCE, among others. So it's a good moment to take a look at, well, where are compliance officers now and what are they doing? And that was one of the first things I noticed about the Walmart matter going back to 2005, and I'll try and go very quickly from there to the present. But let me just say, as we go into this, I know you would agree with this, due process is very important, always. And although I am very strongly in favor of strong enforcement, I am equally in favor of protecting people's rights, all kinds of rights, the rights of CEOs, the rights of journalists, and the rights of Walmart and all of its executives. To be clear and for the public record, Walmart and none of its executives have been convicted of anything. They haven't admitted liability for anything. That may be in process. It remains to be seen. But for the moment, under due process principles, they're entitled to the presumption of innocence. And I want to make it clear that that's my position as well. So what I'm talking about now are reports, media reports, and various allegations that are under investigation. So having said that, just to be clear also, we as the public, as journalists, as readers, as thinkers, compliance officers, we're certainly entitled in a democratic system of our great country, America, to talk about these things. It's a subject of legitimate interest. So we have a sort of balancing going on there. Jumping to Walmart, one of the first things I noticed was the position of the chief counsel for international, who was in a sense their compliance officer for this, Maritza Munich. Her situation, the report came into her, and she proceeded to ask for an investigation, which didn't go forward. So when thinking about as you asked me to focus on the rights or duties, rights and duties of compliance officers, they have a job to do. And it's not an easy job. I think we're increasingly finding out how hard it is to do. And when they do that job, they deserve to be recognized for doing it. And I'm jumping ahead now a little bit. I've just read Walmart's, and I encourage everyone to read this if you get a chance, their global report. They've taken some very significant, almost cutting-edge steps here around compliance and compliance officers. But if you ask compliance officers, they will tell you, this has been my experience, maybe people have a different one, that it is a hard job to do, especially if you have to tell senior executives that a project they've worked on really is not doable and really needs to be rethought. So I would suggest one of the things that a compliance officer is entitled to would be something like this, Tom. They deserve a hearing. In other words, if they say, I have serious concerns about this, let's escalate this up. Let's take this to my boss. Let's take this to your boss. If they can't resolve it, let's take it all the way up through the chief compliance officer to the board. In other words, the compliance officer, maybe he is being too tough. Maybe. Or maybe he's not being too tough. Maybe it's just having to come to grips with it. So that would be a key principle for me, that compliance officers deserve respect for their jobs, but so do business executives. And there has to be a way, including at the new Walmart, to go up, escalate issues up to the board. Both sides come in, business side comes in, other side comes in, the lawyers come in, audit, whoever, and lay this out for the board, and the company make the best decision it can, consistent also with ethics. Lawful but awful is not a good way to do business anymore. We were just talking about that. So that, in today's terms, inside the company, that would be a key protection, I think, for the business side as well as the compliance officer side. So in a long way, that's one of the things I think they're entitled to. Is that responsive to your question, Tom?
Absolutely, absolutely. But how would you respond as a compliance officer if you raise these concerns and a chief executive or other senior business leader said, you know, Mike, I appreciate that. You have pointed out significant risks, but you're the lawyer, you're the compliance officer. You go figure out a way to do this in compliance with the FCPA, yet allow us to move forward. I mean, isn't that fair for a business leader to say?
I think it's a very good question to say. I think a lot of compliance officers and lawyers want to say, don't tell me no, tell me how. And that's a very legitimate question. How can I do this? If you don't want me to do it one way, this is important for the company, this project, how do you want me to do it? Let's take a quick example. Compliance officers, I have real problems with you're going to bid on a major procurement in a country that unfortunately on Transparency International is ranked as a company that has real concerns with corruption. I'd just like to point out Walmart, to its credit, it does business in, I think, over 27 countries in the world. Most of Asia, most of Latin America, and so forth. So for Walmart, this is, and most other companies as well. Right here in Miami, we have lots of companies doing business in Latin America. Not to single it out, but you're going to do business in countries that have issues with who's corrupt and who isn't in that country. So the businessman says, well, I want to do this project. And the officer says, well, I'm uncomfortable with the people you want to partner with on this. Now, that would sound like a no, but it should be a how. He should say, well, okay, we're going to need to bring in help and do a real investigation of the people that you want to do business with. Is that okay with you? Is it going to be okay with them? Because I'm going to need your help to check out to see, are our potential business partners okay or not? You could take it one step further and say, I'll agree and support this if we can work out a kind of teamwork approach, an integrity pact among all the potential bidders for this procurement that says we'll monitor through a third-party neutral to make sure I won't cheat and you don't cheat. Now that's a great solution, because then the procurement really will be based on best product, best price, and nothing else. So yes, that's how. Now let's go back to the escalation. Let's say they've done that, they still can't agree, and the business guy says, I think that's unnecessary, and the compliance guy says, I think it's essential. This is a very good thing, Tom. This is what I was talking about in my last post on May 13th in the FCPA blog, kind of checks and balances. This is a good moment. Now they can say, okay, let's escalate up. Let's go to the chief compliance officer. The CEO should say, great, let's go. And let's go to all the way up to the board if necessary to make a decision. I would love to see that process going on. Tom, the only thing is it may already be going on at Walmart and others, but we don't know about it.
Right.
So we need more wonderful journalists like you to invite, the new head of Walmart, Jay Jorgensen, their chief global. I vote in favor of him coming on and making a podcast with you, Tom, because he's a living laboratory. They are a wonderful living laboratory. Business leadership looks like it. Certainly Jay Jorgensen on the first order. Whether he's going to get the support, we'll find out. But I'd invite him, Tom. Let's ask him.
Well, he spoke at the Dow Jones Global Compliance Conference, and he's speaking again next week at Compliance Week. So Walmart is starting to show that what I would call transparency, or kind of the light of day shining in. They certainly have done that with the release of their compliance initiatives, and I certainly applaud these efforts. And from my perspective, I really hope we can use this as a learning moment and a teaching moment in many different areas of teaching. And with that, I'd like to turn to your post this week, which was entitled Walmart, It's Not the Company, It's the Compliance System. And the reason, Mike, that it struck me as so powerful is you detailed, let me count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, at least 10 different areas or disciplines, both inside a company and outside a company, that can lead to an effective compliance system. So I'd just like to kind of go through those and get your thoughts on each one of those. Obviously, it starts with a compliance program.
Sure. Well, the compliance program, Tom, is sort of a bedrock of inside the company. As I've tried to point out in some of the others, it's an important piece, but it's not the only piece. We tend to think about the compliance program alone, but many of the others are going to be outside, like the journalists and so forth that we'll come to. And as a compliance program, we have lots of guidelines for that. I would just point out one significant gap that happened. And the gap was that the compliance officers who allegedly tried to go forward with this in 2005 were obstructed by senior management, reportedly, and that's a serious problem. That's a gap that needs to be closed, because you can build this entire compliance structure. Walmart now has, good for them, excellent, they have 2,000 compliance professionals, Tom. But those people have to be able to do their job, and they have to have reasonable protections for when they're doing their jobs. It didn't happen with Marissa Munitz as a compliance hero. I wrote a post about it. We don't really know what happened there. The question is not then, 2005, the question is now. How will these be handled? So that's my comment in general about that element. The second one, if we want to go through them quickly, boards and corporate governance. These systems will not work without board involvement. It's a primary check and balance between the C-suite, the board, and the chief compliance officer. So there has to be really good board engagement, and I think that's starting to come. I mean, the audit committee of Walmart supervised this wonderful new sort of restructuring, and it needs to stay involved because of the principle of escalation that I mentioned and other things.
Next up, you have whistleblowers and internal reporting.
Yeah.
How does that fit into an overall system?
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you look at almost every single headline case, every single scandal, almost without exception, there is a tip from somebody who knew what was going on. Usually it's an internal employee who gets this sense of, hey, we're really not that kind of company, and we'll call somebody. That's how the company often finds out that it has a problem. Now, it seems to me that that's a critical observation if we're all committed to helping companies correct things that are going wrong. So the whistleblower, or even better, it's internal reports, over 80% of them go to the manager of that person, not to the hotline. So that's something we should say, gosh, we're working. This is a good corporate culture. We have employees coming forward, and we need to know that information. So that's a key element of detection and prevention, and we need to protect them and make sure that they feel okay about making those reports.
I found your next point very interesting because you really stepped outside the corporate sphere to point out the media and the freedom of the press as part of an overall effective compliance system. What are your thoughts on that?
Tom, I'm especially coming from you, Tom, who's both an attorney, a compliance officer with experience, but also you're a journalist, you're a blogger, you're doing interviews. I mean, the role of the press here has been understated and can't be overstated. There was allegedly a cover-up at the highest levels of the largest retailer in the world from 2005 until about 2012. That's 7 years, Tom. That's a long time. That's one thing that makes this case so important. In fact, it would have continued, allegedly, but for first the tip by the whistleblower, and then the New York Times reported David Barstow, who brought it out to the public for investigation. So you can't underestimate the role of the press. Tom, what readers of your columns, and maybe people listening to this, we are all an important part of the compliance system. We ask questions, we hear the answers, we say, oh, this company is a compliance leader, that's great, they deserve our support, this company is not. It's part of the system, and in Walmart it's dramatic because it ended what might have been a very serious cover-up that might have continued. We wouldn't be having this conversation but for the New York Times.
Your next point is one that is sometimes articulated, but not as often as perhaps it should be, and that's the role of enforcement authorities in an overall compliance ecosystem. What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Tom. Strong enforcement is every compliance officer's best friend. We're all human, and we all are trying to do our best. But when it doesn't go right, there has to be some consequences to that. So the DOJ and the SEC, and now globally, China has taken its own ways about doing this. They're necessary to maintain the ethical tone that says we're all in this together. But if somebody cheats on that consensus, there has to be sanctions for that, or else it's just not going to last.
Well, and that leads into your next subject of sanctions and incentives matrix.
There's been a lot of great research done now about how people make decisions. I really encourage people, if they can, to take a look at that research. Scott Killingsworth at the Rand Institute has written several papers on this. Jeff Kaplan writes about conflicts of interest. It's a new body of science, and we need to take account of it. The science indicates that lots of people will make a decision that in hindsight doesn't look so good. But when they're doing it, we all believe it. Me too, Tom. So the sanctions and incentives are there to sort of help us, stay focused. So we have, there are many in place now by law or by DOJ policy, and I'm an incentives guy myself. The new Walmart report has very interesting descriptions of their incentive system now. The one that gets mentioned is pay, executive pay, which is very important. But in the fine print of what their report says, they also do small things like, Tom, if you've done a great job, and I'd nominate you this year for in the world of compliance, you get recognized at Walmart for that at one of their annual meetings. I think that's really sending a message. I think incentives are great. Tom, you wrote about this, that you said to Walmart, be a leader and go big on compliance. And that's an incentives picture. I like that a lot. We want to incentivize people and recognize them for doing what they're doing. That's why I'm speaking very favorably of Jay Jorgensen and parts of Walmart today. They have, if you read this report, I wish them all the best. They're certainly in the right direction. We'll see if they're able to carry it out. Well, that's incentive. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, although I have written on Walmart, I can't take credit for Go Big. That Matt Ellis wrote that.
Matt Ellis, right.
But next up, you have a point that is really a lot of people comment on and talk about because it doesn't happen very often, and perhaps as lawyers we'd like to see a little bit more, which is judicial review. Yes.
Well, the actions of the Walmart board back in 2005 and then afterwards, are a subject of concern. There is a body of law that generally says boards, and rightly so, run the company on behalf of stock shareholders, and they shouldn't be second guessed, or they can never run the company. But once in a while, if some of the directors are involved in self-dealing, that undercuts everything for the shareholders and everyone else. So the courts have the right to look at that, and there is a case pending now in Delaware about just this issue.
Right.
And we'll see. And Delaware courts are very, very good. So that's part of the system. So it's, we've written about this that I think since it's part of the compliance system, some judges don't really understand what compliance officers do. They know what lawyers do, they know what auditors do, but compliance is sort of new. And they don't really know what we do. So some people have suggested, and I agree with them, that for the right kind of case, the compliance profession should be a real friend of the court and write a brief, a friend of the court brief, an amicus brief, and explain this is what compliance officers do. And here's how we help the public every day. Lots of cases that would be in the headlines, Tom, and you know this. I'm in Miami, you're in Houston. Lots of cases would be in the headlines, but for the work of compliance officers who say, wait a minute, that's not the way we're going to do this. We'll do it a different way, but not that way.
Right.
And so, that's an important part of the system, how the judges understand what we do and to inform them. That's on us to inform them, though.
Your next point you really touched on throughout our conversation, but that's business leadership.
Business leadership, I can't say strongly enough that business leadership is one of the pillars of the whole compliance system of checks and balances. I live in my own world, most people do, but the world of business leadership is critical here. Let's take Walmart again as an example. You often say to business people, you need to upgrade your compliance. And you get answers like this. I don't need to do that because, you know, that's how business is done in that part of the world, and I'm not going to do that. Or compliance is a loser. What's the point of putting money into that? So you get a mixture of cynicism and denial. You try and tell them you will be prosecuted for this. You're playing Russian roulette. You may get away with it 3 times, pull the trigger, and on the 4th one you'll be prosecuted. The world is changing. If not in America, you'd be prosecuted in China, you'd be prosecuted by England or somewhere. So business leadership, like Walmart is saying, is a living laboratory. One of the largest corporations in the world, Tom, they're so big, 2.2 million employees, over 480 billion in revenue, 17 billion in profits, operating in almost every big country in the world. Walmart is saying, yes, you can do this. You can do it. Look, we're a very large company, so you know we have a global kind of compliance system, but the DOJ guidelines say, well, do a risk assessment and then tailor down to where the real risk is, and then take it on as a business problem. Stop thinking of this as a compliance problem, as a legal problem. It's a business problem. That's what Walmart has done. Figure out where your risk is and how you want to address it. And when that message comes from Walmart, that's a little different than it coming from a compliance officer or me and you, because he's a businessman. And he says, well, we did it. You can do it. That's a big step, Tom. Big step.
And it really leads into your next point, which is an ethical business culture.
You know, Tom, you can give people sanctions and incentives only up to a point. And after that, it's sort of like an identity. And the best identity is let's say somebody would propose, well, let's make more money and sell adulterated drugs. We'll lower our factory standards and it'll be cheaper and we'll make more money. And the people around him would say, we don't do that here. We're not that kind of company. In the end, that's what ethics is about. We're not that kind of company. So let's go back to Walmart. I mean, you could say Walmart, you could say lots of companies elsewhere, you could say Siemens and others. You look around the world, there is corruption going on every day. We all know that. That's the reality. Walmart and other companies are saying, we're going to do business, even in places where are notorious for corruption, but we're only going to do business without bribery. Now that's an ethical stand. And that kind of attitude goes right through the company all the way down. And that's why Walmart gives these kind of recognition awards as well as money. It's to set that tone. So, you know, it's the bedrock, and it's by law. What's one of the biggest changes, Tom, you might agree with me or not, to see written into law, into the federal sentencing guidelines, through SOX and through other things, the idea that a company is responsible for an ethical business culture. Now, we don't even really know what that means, but it's there already, that it's in the law to maintain an ethical business culture. But to make this clear, Tom, you know, they say if everybody's responsible for feeding the dog starves.
Right.
So who's responsible to operationalize maintaining an ethical business culture? Excuse me 1 second. Excuse me. That's a key question, and I'd be interested to see how Walmart deals with it. To give an example, I think it's the board and the CECO are responsible for looking at ethical questions, in particular the principle of lawful but awful. So that there'll be a lot more to be said about that. Who's responsible for checking the ethical tone and what's going on? And I think, again, it has to come back to an independent CECO and to the board.
And your last point is global stakeholders. How do global stakeholders work into the overall compliance framework?
You know, and in the blog post in May 13th in the FCPA blog, I quoted President Lincoln, with public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. You know, that's the long-term view of things, Tom. You know, you and I both have seen the world change a lot about a lot of different things. I mean, I grew up in a small town in the South, and a lot has changed from those days to now. So public opinion may be slow, but it does move things. It does move things. And right now, I wrote a post about the people in Guanajuato, Mexico, where multinationals are opening up plants there. And it's a very good thing that they're doing. And this one woman said that she finally had a chance to run her own business. And she said, I want to work hard. I'm a middle class person. I want to work hard, but I don't want to pay any bribes. I want to just run my business. And she said, I want a legal life. That really resonated with me. And I'd like to say to her, well, some of the multinationals that you're working with, they have compliance officers. They should be your natural ally. You should get to know them. If Walmart is operating there, you have a whole company that is now saying to the so-called court of public opinion, we're on your side. We agree with you. We want to have the best product at the best price. We don't like corruption. We're on your side. So as long as that sentiment is strong, the FCPA will remain strong, enforcement will remain strong, businesses like Walmart will get reputational credit for what they're doing. So it all kind of will come together. If you lose public sentiment, I don't think anything is possible. Which comes back around to you, Tom, in journalism. So it's all about us, Tom. You know, it's all about journalism.
Michael, we're unfortunately at the end of our time, but I was wondering if anyone wanted to contact you, could they email you? And if so, could you give them your email address?
Sure, absolutely. Like Tom, I'm a contributing editor at the FCPA blog. My email address is michael75we@gmail.com. michael75we@gmail.com. Or if you go to the homepage of the FCPA blog and look me up, you'll find me there. Tom, I've enjoyed this talk. I wish you all the best in what you're doing. You're one of the checks and balances in the compliance system, Tom.
Well, you're very kind to say so. But that brings us to the end, so I hope you've enjoyed this, and we look forward to visiting with you again. Thank you.
Very good.